Let me tell you something most people aren't ready to hear. Shadow powers are not evil. They're not demonic. They're not something to be feared, avoided, or exorcised from your life like some kind of spiritual infection. In fact, the very idea that shadow powers are bad is the greatest lie ever sold to the awakened soul. And I get it. You've been conditioned by religion, by media, by spiritual circles to believe light is good and dark is bad. That power drawn from your shadow must be dangerous. That anything that doesn't feel pure, soft, or high vibe must be avoided. But that's just another layer of illusion. And once you start peeling that illusion back, what you'll find underneath is not something terrifying, it's something liberating. We've been trained to believe that the shadow is where our demons live. But I want you to consider something radical. What if the shadow is where your greatest gifts are hiding? What if the parts of you that you've disowned, repressed, or denied, your anger, your lust, your ambition, your jealousy, your fear aren't mistakes but portals? What if the key to your evolution isn't in escaping the shadow, but in learning how to speak its language? Because the truth is, shadow powers are not dark in the way you've been taught to understand darkness. They are dark in the way a seed is buried in the soil, hidden, potent, waiting for the right conditions to break open and grow. When you first start waking up spiritually, you're drawn to the light. That's normal. The light feels safe. It feels healing. It feels like coming home. But if you stay in that light too long, without ever exploring the depths, without ever confronting the raw, primal forces within you, you start to become imbalanced. You start to perform spirituality instead of embodying it. You start to chase bliss and avoid truth. And eventually something starts to crack because your soul knows it came here not just to bask in the light, but to integrate the full spectrum of human experience. And integration doesn't happen through avoidance. It happens through confrontation. I want to tell you something I've never said publicly before. There was a time in my life when I was terrified of my own power. I could feel it pulsing underneath the surface, this wild, untamed energy that didn't care about being politically correct or spiritually palatable. It was ancient. It was intense. It was mine. But I had been so deeply programmed to believe that anything that didn't feel light was dangerous, I kept trying to suppress it. I tried to meditate it away. I tried to love and light it into silence. But it didn't go away. It just got louder. Until one day I broke. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep killing pieces of myself in the name of being spiritual. And that's when I realized something that changed my entire life. My shadow wasn't trying to destroy me. It was trying to initiate me. That's when I stopped resisting. I sat with my rage. I invited my jealousy to speak. I let my fear unravel without judgment. I looked at the parts of myself that I had locked in the basement of my being and I said, "What do you want to teach me?" And what I discovered wasn't darkness, it was depth. I found focus in my anger. I found clarity in my fear. I found drive in my envy. I found truth in my shame. All the things I was taught to push away were actually tools. Shadow powers are tools. But like any tool, if you don't know how to use them, they can hurt you. That's why the world fears them. Because most people are unconscious. Most people are reactive. Most people are sleepwalking. So yes, when shadow energy is wielded unconsciously, it can be destructive. But when it's wielded with awareness, it becomes sacred. It becomes divine fire. You were not born to be half of yourself. You were not born to be a walking performance of light. You were born to be whole. And wholeness includes shadow. It includes the parts of you that have been demonized by culture, family, and even spirituality itself. The moment you stop trying to be good and start trying to be real, your energy changes. People feel it. You become magnetic. You become unshakable. Because now, instead of hiding your shadow, you're channeling it. You're alchemizing it. You're using it to fuel your purpose instead of letting it sabotage your peace. And here's where it gets interesting. When you truly begin to work with your shadow, it starts revealing things to you that the light never could. You start seeing through illusions. You start detecting lies before they're spoken. You start sensing invisible dynamics in relationships, in rooms, in systems. Your intuition sharpens not because you read more books or listen to more gurus, but because you reclaim the parts of you that were once buried. The shadow is a well of ancient intelligence. It holds memory. It holds instinct. It holds power that doesn't need to ask for permission. And once you stop fearing it, you start reclaiming everything that was ever taken from you in the name of obedience. So let me ask you something deeper than just, are you spiritual? Let me ask you this. What part of your power are you still afraid of? What emotion, what memory, what instinct still makes you flinch when it rises in you? Because that's the gateway. That's the signal. That's the thread you must follow if you ever want to walk this path fully awake. The shadow isn't the enemy. Your judgment of it is. The real danger is not in feeling too much, it's in not feeling at all. And perhaps the most shocking truth of all is this. The universe entrusts shadow power to those who are willing to face themselves without flinching. It doesn't give that kind of power to the fake, the performative, the self-righteous. It gives it to the ones who have been to the depths and returned with wisdom. The ones who've been through hell and refuse to lose their heart. The ones who no longer seek to be seen as holy, but who live as whole.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Here's the paradox that confuses almost every seeker on the spiritual path. The very thing you're trying to escape is the thing that's trying to lead you home. Your darkness, your confusion, your pain, your shame, it's not the obstacle. It's the invitation. It doesn't block your path. It is the path. And the longer you resist it, the more lost you feel. The more you ignore your shadow, the more it dominates you from the background, like an unseen puppeteer pulling strings you don't even know exist. But once you stop running, once you turn toward what you fear the most and sit with it, not to fix it, but to understand it, you'll start to feel something shift. You'll realize your darkness isn't a curse. It's a compass. There is a reason your shadow follows you so closely. Not because it's trying to haunt you, but because it's trying to guide you. Every trigger, every breakdown, every moment where you feel like I can't do this anymore, those aren't failures. Those are thresholds. They're the moments when your soul is trying to course-correct whatever false identity you've been performing. And shadow work is the process of letting that mask fall off, slowly, painfully, honestly, until all that remains is the real you, not the polished, spiritual version of you who says the right things and lights candles with intention, but the raw, unfiltered force of truth that exists underneath all the pretending. Have you ever noticed that some of your deepest wounds are also the places where your deepest wisdom comes from? That's not coincidence. That's alchemy. That's how soul evolution works. The heartbreak that shattered your identity also opened your heart. The rejection that made you question your worth also forced you to look inside and find value that no external source could give. The rage you were told to suppress since childhood, that same rage contains your boundaries, your voice, your fire. It's not that these aspects of you are bad. It's that you were never taught how to listen to them. You were only taught how to silence them. But let me offer you a radical idea. What if your emotions are not just responses to life, but messages from your soul? What if your anger is trying to tell you where your power is being stolen? What if your sadness is revealing what you've abandoned within yourself? What if your envy is showing you what you desire but are too afraid to claim? Every dark emotion is a breadcrumb. Every uncomfortable feeling is a thread. And if you're brave enough to follow that thread, it will always lead to a deeper truth about who you are and what you came here to do. I'll be honest with you, shadow work isn't glamorous. It's not something you can post on Instagram with a filter and a quote. It's messy. It's confronting. It will bring you face to face with the parts of yourself you've avoided for a lifetime. But it will also give you access to your true power, the kind of power that doesn't need external validation, that doesn't collapse under pressure, that doesn't morph itself to fit in. Because when you've faced your own darkness and made peace with it, you become unshakable. You're no longer afraid of being misunderstood, because you understand yourself. You're no longer afraid of being alone because you've learned how to sit with your soul. That's real power. That's sovereignty. And here's something else they don't tell you. Your shadow holds your creative genius. Think about it. Where does art come from? Not from perfection, not from sanitized, emotionless spaces. It comes from the depths, from longing, from brokenness, from rage, from grief, from love so intense it burns. The greatest musicians, poets, visionaries, and revolutionaries didn't create from light alone. They created from their shadow. They turned their pain into portals. They turned their wounds into weapons of love. And you can too, but only if you stop trying to be above your darkness and start mining it for gold. Maybe you've been feeling stuck. Maybe your manifestations aren't landing. Maybe your spiritual practice feels hollow lately. That's not a sign to meditate harder or read more books. That's a sign to go deeper, to stop climbing and start digging, to ask yourself the uncomfortable questions. What am I avoiding? What am I pretending not to feel? What truth have I buried so deep that even I forgot it was there? Because here's the truth. Your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to integrate with you. It wants to be seen, acknowledged, honored. It wants to serve you. But it can only do that when you stop treating it like an intruder and start treating it like a guide. The moment you stop seeing your darkness as the enemy and start seeing it as your greatest teacher, the game changes. You begin to move differently. You trust your instincts more. You speak with more resonance. You love with more depth, and people can feel it. They might not be able to name it, but they'll feel your presence. They'll feel your energy. Because when you've walked through your own darkness and survived, you carry a light that's different, not blinding, not performative, but anchored, real, embodied. And maybe that's what all of this is about, not becoming enlightened in the way we've been taught, but becoming whole. Not escaping the dark, but dancing with it. Not running from our wounds, but turning them into wisdom. That's the path. That's the point. That's the power. So I leave you with this question, and I want you to sit with it, not from your mind, but from your soul. What if the thing you've been most afraid to face is the very thing that will set you free? We've been sold a dream wrapped in gold words and good intentions, but underneath it all it's a lie. One of the most seductive, widespread deceptions in modern spirituality is the idea that we should only surround ourselves with positivity, that we must stay high vibe, think only good thoughts, and banish anything that feels dark or uncomfortable. The phrase positive vibes only has become a mantra for millions, but I'm here to tell you the truth. It's a spiritual prison. It's not enlightenment. It's avoidance. And it's keeping you small, disconnected, and out of alignment with your actual power. Let's get real. Life is not all light. The universe is not all light. You are not all light. And to pretend otherwise is to deny the very nature of existence. We live in a dualistic realm. Day and night, birth and death, creation and destruction. These polarities aren't mistakes, they're the architecture of reality. So when you cling to only one side, when you only allow the good feelings and reject the rest, you create fragmentation within yourself. You become divided. You become fake. And worse, you start to fear your own truth. But here's the deeper damage: when you suppress your so-called negative emotions, your sadness, your anger, your grief, your frustration, you don't get rid of them. You just exile them. You push them down, shove them into the shadows of your psyche, and pretend they don't exist, but they don't disappear. They grow stronger. They wait. And eventually, they erupt through your relationships, your health, your energy, your choices. That's not spiritual growth. That's spiritual bypassing. That's wearing a mask of peace while your soul is screaming behind it. I've seen it happen to so many people. They light candles, they chant mantras, they write affirmations, but deep down, they feel empty. They don't feel powerful. They feel fragile. They're terrified of any thought that isn't 100% supportive. They're afraid to admit they're angry. They judge themselves for not being positive enough. And all of this pressure to be perfect, to be pure, to be constantly joyful, it doesn't elevate them. It shrinks them. It makes them energetically brittle. Because true spiritual power doesn't come from ignoring half your humanity. It comes from embracing all of it. Let me say something radical. Anger is not unspiritual. Grief is not a lower vibration. Rage is not evil. These are sacred messengers. They exist for a reason. They are your soul's way of pointing you to what is out of alignment. Anger can show you where your boundaries are being violated. Grief can open your heart wider than any meditation ever could. Fear can protect you when you're being naive. These emotions are not the enemy, they're energy. And when you stop labeling them as bad, when you stop resisting them, they start to move. That's when true healing happens, not because you forced yourself to feel good, but because you allowed yourself to feel everything. And here's the real kicker. When you allow the full range of your emotional experience, you become more magnetic. People can feel your authenticity. They trust you because you're not faking peace. You're not performing happiness. You're living truth. And truth is the highest frequency of all, not forced positivity, not spiritual perfection, but radical, embodied truth. That's what the world is starving for. Not more polished influencers talking about abundance while avoiding their shadow, but real humans who've walked through fire and still choose love. If you're constantly trying to stay positive, you're likely avoiding the very emotions that are trying to free you. You're trying to stay above water, but your soul is asking you to dive deep. And the deeper you go, the more you'll find that your darkness was never something to be fixed. It was something to be felt, to be understood, to be transformed. That's the real alchemy. Not transmuting sadness into fake smiles, but transmuting pain into power. Not avoiding conflict, but learning how to speak truth with love. Not escaping your humanity, but honoring it as sacred. Ask yourself this: what emotions have I labeled as wrong? What feelings have I tried to banish in the name of being spiritual? Because whatever you've labeled as not okay is where your power is hiding. It's not in the light. It's in the shadow you've been trained to fear. And the more you chase only good vibes, the more you distance yourself from your own soul. You are not born to vibrate high 24/7. You are born to experience, to feel, to fall, to rise again. The soul doesn't evolve by staying comfortable. It evolves through contrast, through challenge, through depth. And when you start embracing that, when you stop trying to curate your emotions like an Instagram feed, that's when the real magic begins. That's when your energy becomes undeniable. That's when people look at you and think, I don't know what it is, but there's something real about them. That's when you become a mirror for others, not of perfection, but of permission. Permission to feel, permission to break, permission to heal, permission to be fully human and still be divine. So the next time you hear someone say positive vibes only, I want you to pause. I want you to ask yourself, do I want to look enlightened or do I want to be whole? Because wholeness requires all of you, the light, the dark, the sacred mess in between. And the moment you stop rejecting your own depth is the moment you start becoming who you were always meant to be. There comes a moment in your journey, not when you've mastered the light, not when you've ascended into bliss, but when you've stood knee-deep in your own darkness, trembling and decided not to run. That is the moment you're crowned, not with gold or glory, but with something far more powerful, truth. And that truth changes everything. Because from that moment forward, you no longer lead from ego, performance, or borrowed wisdom. You lead from embodied experience. You lead from the shadow. This is what most people misunderstand about spiritual leadership. They think it's about being perfect, about being endlessly calm, endlessly forgiving, endlessly radiant. But that's not leadership, that's performance. Real leaders are not the ones who float above the chaos. They're the ones who walk through it and emerge with wisdom, not wounds. They are the ones who have tasted their own rage, felt their own grief, bled from their own betrayals, and still choose to serve. That is what makes someone magnetic. That is what makes someone trustworthy. Not how much light they emit, but how much shadow they've integrated. When you wear your shadow crown, you stop needing to convince anyone of your worth. You stop chasing validation. You stop hiding the hard parts of your story because you realize those are the parts that make you powerful. You don't speak from theory, you speak from scars. You don't pretend to have it all together, you show others how to walk with dignity even when you're falling apart. You become a mirror for others, not of perfection, but of possibility. You become a living reminder that it's okay to be messy and still be divine. Okay to be angry and still be loving. Okay to be broken and still be called. This is the new spiritual leadership the world is starving for. Not the sanitized, soft-spoken guru who never gets triggered, but the real ones. The ones who've screamed into the void and still showed up for others. The ones who've questioned everything, lost everything, and still opened their hearts. The ones who've buried pieces of themselves and then dug them up, piece by piece, in the name of truth. That's what makes you a leader, not your followers, not your platform, not your spiritual vocabulary, but your capacity to hold space for your own darkness without being consumed by it. You don't become a leader because you rise above the shadow. You become a leader when you learn how to walk with it. When you can sit with someone else's pain without needing to fix it because you've already sat with your own. When you can speak uncomfortable truths with love because you've stopped gaslighting yourself. When you can hold both the light and the dark in your hands and say, all of this is me and all of this is sacred. That's when you stop being a seeker and start becoming a guide. And here's the thing most people never realize. Your shadow doesn't make you less spiritual, it makes you more real. And in a world drowning in fakery, being real is the rarest form of power. When you embrace your shadow, you become uncompromisingly honest. You stop playing small because you no longer fear being seen. You stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable because you've already made peace with your discomfort. You stop needing to be liked because you've learned how to love yourself in your darkest hour. And people feel that, not just in your words, but in your energy. They feel your depth. They feel your gravity. They feel your presence. Not because you've avoided the shadows, but because you've claimed them. That's the crown. It's not flashy. It's not handed to you. You earn it in the fire, in the silence, in the breaking and the rebuilding. You earn it by facing everything you once ran from and standing tall anyway. So I leave you with this final question. What if your crown was never meant to shine in the light but to glow in the dark? What if your leadership isn't about rising above the pain, but about walking through it with your head held high? What if the world doesn't need another enlightened master but a fully human soul who's not afraid to lead from the shadows? You already wear the crown. Now walk like it, speak like it, lead like it. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your origin story. And you were never here to avoid it. You were here to become it. Integrated, whole, unshakable. Because in the end, the ones who've danced with the dark and still choose to serve the light, they are the ones the world remembers. They are the ones who change everything.